Hey guys, welcome to TGS. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 clay guns. We're not really going to focus on them. We're going to parallel them against their cheaper alternatives. So first off, we really need to establish what are the top 10 clay guns and get your hatchets out because your gun might not be in there. Obviously, top of the list, it's not at the top of the list, in no order whatsoever. Mark 38 from Maruku, generally in a grade 5 because you want the pretty one. A DT11, a 692, an A400, a Benelli, a Guarini Invictus, a Browning 725 Pro Sport, obviously a Perazzi MX8, a Blaser F3, and a Krieghoff K80. Do you want that list slower? Well, you can't have it. We're going to go through them one by one and parallel them against their cheap alternatives because all of these guns, well, a Benelli Super Sport's probably the cheapest on the list at about 1,800 quid. $2,200, something like that. I have no idea how much it is in America, but so they're all starting at that price, going up to, what's a K80? About 12 or 13 grand. That's a lot of money. Can you get the same gun for less money and what are their alternatives? So let's start with Perazzi, probably one of the most cloned and copied actions in the world because Perazzi itself is a bit of a clone. It's a boss action gun. So there's a lot of cheaper alternatives. When I say cheaper alternatives, we're talking about the alternative to a new Perazzi, something like a high-tech or an MX8 or an MX2000. You can buy all of them second-hand. There's your first option. You can go and buy an old Beta MX8 for about 2 grand. However, they are not the hardest guns in the world, so expect maybe that's not the wisest option. It is, as I said, the most cloned gun in the world, purely based on the fact it's a boss action gun, so it's a clone in the first place. Alternatives are Yieldits, Pro Sport, a real obvious one, a real direct copy of something like an MX12, a great copy as well, and you can have them for about 1,200–1,300 quid for a base model. Less than, actually, I think, if you go for really low grade wood. That is a very cheap alternative, and from 20 yards you really can't tell the difference. Keyman. Keyman's like the Spanish Perazzi, if you like. Great guns, unbelievably good guns actually, and you can pick them up second-hand for under 2 grand for a bit of a rat one. But you'll pick up a good one for that in that sort of 2.5–3 grand bracket, which is a really good option. Whereas a good Perazzi is going to be 4.5–5. You know, I was going to say it, the Aranberry Mac, the cheapest Perazzi copyish clone that you'll ever find in that similar sort of looks style bracket. Purely based if you're buying these on styling. Because if you're buying a Perazzi for handling, well, that could mean anything. There's so many guns out there that handle similarly because Perazzis can handle like anything, as we've said a lot. Next, the Mark 38 Maruku. Well, the obvious option here is just to buy a grade 1 version because a grade 1 version is 1,400 quid. 1,400 pounds. That's a very reasonably priced gun. So it's actually technically the cheapest gun on this list that you could buy new. And after a few quid thrown into it, a few pounds thrown into it, that you could actually have something very special. Alternatives to a Mark 38. Well, they've been making the Mark 38 in various guises for a long time. So you could buy an older one. You could buy the predecessor, the Mark 3800, of which there are some amazing models that handle like heaven on earth. And you can pick them up for like £500 or £600 and it will compete very, very well with that Mark 38 bracket. What you might struggle with there is in older guns, finding guns that fit the modern mold of what a good gun should be, you know, a 32-inch gun weighing about £8.2. However, I assure you that 30 years ago when these guns were built, people were still shooting in the high 90s. I think the standard shooting has come on a way, but that's because our understanding is one of the pool of people doing it is that much bigger. Plus, we can see the scores from up country down here where that used to be not a big deal. So, can you go and smash everything with a 28-inch gun? Yes. Can you get a 28-inch gun that handles like a 32-inch gun? Yes. You just have to kind of get over the fact that your barrels look a bit short. You might have some weights on there. You might have some bits changing around the place. It might not be looking as nice and be as stylish or as fashionable, but you can get the same for less, which is something I say very rarely. You can get, it is technically less. A second-hand gun is not as good as a new gun because it will be worn slightly. So you do not gain the same for less. Or no, it is extremely rare that you will get the same gun for less money. This is what I should have said right at the beginning of this, is are you going to get a top 10 clay gun for less money than the top 10 clay guns? Mostly no, but yes. I think the bottom line here before I go any further is to say that these guns, let's say that is the top 10 clay gun level. These guns might cost 50% of the money, but do 70% of the full performance. So that actually represents better value for money. However, they are not the same gun. And I can hammer that home again and again and again, because when I go to something like a 692 and say, what are alternatives to a 692 black? Well, for a little bit less money, or quite a lot less money, you could buy just a 686. And if you really want something that actually handles like a 692, a 682X, a heavyweight 30-year-old 682, will be about £1,100. That's not a great deal of money in the grand scheme of things. Or if you want, you could buy yourself, and this is where I'm going to before, an ATA, which is basically a Beretta, which is not. And that is one of those examples that, and I think ATAs are great guns, obviously, they're good enough for the money. But when people come in, and I did a video about this years ago, when people say it's basically a Beretta, it's not. You do not get the same for less in that department. There you go. So that's your 692. The K80 Krieghoff, there's not a lot that competes with the K80 Krieghoff. They're a very special thing. It depends what you're looking for, I suppose is the thing. If you want something that handles like that, that can be found. If you want something that looks like that, that can also be found in the guise of a Maruku, a Remington, or a Valmet, all using that same top sliding action. That is quite interesting. I think that you can actually go out and find something that is running off the same design, and you'll find most of the people that shoot the Maruku 3000, the Remington, and the Valmet say that it's basically a Krieghoff. Which, I suppose, if you're talking about pure technicality, it's a bit like saying the Aaron Mac is basically a old Perazzi. It's basically the same mechanically. Is it the same quality? No, and that's kind of what you're paying for with the K80, the Krieghoffs, is the steel they use them for is basically adamantium, unobtainium magic. That's why they're good. They are so solid and rock hard. The Maruku 3000 is very hard, but you will struggle when things do break on any of these older guns. And that's the downside as well, that actually when you're buying the cheaper alternative to the top 10 clay guns, what you're buying when you buy a top 10 clay gun is you get the reliability and the backup parts and the service. The beauty of buying something mainstream, like a VW Golf or a BMW 3 Series, is you can go to any garage and they know how to work on it. When you bring in something like an old Valmet, we might be able to work on it, but the parts will have to be made or repaired, so that there's an ongoing cost issue that could be a little better. So it might not be the cheaper option, which is the funnier thing to say. Maybe this video should have been called the top 10 guns and their better value options, but they're not all better value. Blaser F3, alternatives to a Blaser F3, there aren't really very many. So the beauty of the F3 is they have the inline hammer system. There are very few guns that actually use that system. So if you're looking for a cheap alternative to an F3 mechanically, there aren't, well, there's a few. Synergy? There's a few. But they're not really in the similar sort of league. Best bet if you want a Blaser F3 and can't afford it is buy a second-hand older Blaser F3, which you can pick up now for like a couple of grand. They're actually a really reasonable machine, the older ones. And there's no reason with the Blaser F3 that you can't update the entire gun at some point internally and bring it into the modern age. And the whole design of one means that you can choppy-changey, clippy-cloppy, which is quite interesting. So if you buy one, you can make a bit of a triggers broom out of it, which is, I think, quite cool. DT11, cheap alternative to a DT11, the DT10. They're really worth not a great deal at the moment. You pick them up for a couple of grand, which is a lot of money. It's a substantial sum of money, £2,000. But neither is it the price of a new DT11, which is 8,000-ish? I don't know. They're a huge amount of money, vast amounts. Interestingly, one of those things that you need to say when somebody says it's basically a, generally that's a lie. A bit like when someone says it literally just happened. The literally doesn't count in that. Basically doesn't add anything to the sentence apart from making it look like you're lying. It's basically, you get people say something like they do this old, we showed one a few weeks ago. Anything with that top bolt, anyone who goes, it's basically a DT10 because it has that top locking bolt system. It's not true. It does not make it basically a DT10 or basically a DT11. So are there many alternatives to the DT10 that aren't a DT11? No, other way around? No. There aren't really. The beauty of all the Beretta systems, obviously 692 and the DT11, and this will bring us on to the next one, which is the Caesar Guerrini Invictus, is that all of the parts are interchangeable. That long-term wearability, anything that wears, that's not a word, anything that wears you can rip off and replace with an oversized piece. There's no machining needed, there's no welding needed, there's a little bit of machining needed, but there's no welding up, there's nothing complex gunsmithery. It's literally spanner, my gun is feeling brand new again, which is nice. Caesar Guerrini Invictus, are there cheap alternatives to the Caesar Guerrini Invictus? Well, it depends why you're buying it again. Handling wise, yeah, there's loads. You just need to be, handling wise, yes, you can create any gun to handle like that if you have enough time and take it to a decent enough gunsmith or, yeah, something like that. What you're really buying an Invictus for is that hard wearing parts changeability. And you know what you can get for a quarter of the price for that? A Beretta Silver Pigeon has very similar attributes in terms of long-term ownership. Is it as good? No. Does it have the same locking surfaces? No. Does it have the same recoil management? No. However, something like a 682 Extra would be an immense option next to a Caesar Guerrini Invictus. You know, similar weights, can get them with similar handling. The Guerrini Invictus fans will be crucifying me here. But actually, there's a lot about things like the Caesar Guerrini Invictus that I like a lot. And a lot of those things that I like a lot are emulated in something like that. The weight, the midweight, the handling, all of that seems pretty legit to me. Alternatives to a A400 multi-target, which is kind of the top end of semi-automatics. Most other cheap semi-automatics will have a variant that can compete. There's a lot of Turkish guns out there that are similar, gas-driven, have step-up ribs, can get with adjustable combs, and will be half of the price. Armsan, I believe, make one. I think Hatsan make one. I don't know if Hatsan make one. Armsan definitely make one that is in that similar sort of feeling. ATA make the Venza, very similarly spec'd in terms of stocks and stuff. You can get that. However, are they the same? No. I was chatting to someone about the other day about the Stoga that we reviewed, the XM1. Great gun, basically just an SMK inside. However, what you're getting when you buy any of these bigger brands is also the backup service you can get when you're buying new, which is nice. Buying a off-brand with somebody who has a less good warranty, a less good distribution system is perhaps not wise. However, some of these mainstream people, some of their warranties aren't worth a damn anyway. A Browning 725. Browning 725 Pro Sport, one of my favourite guns actually. Good quality alternatives. Well, an Ultra XS, you can buy an older one for not a lot of money, but for me it would probably be in that GTI range. You're looking at that high weight spec, one of the old GTIs, an Ultra would probably fit that spec very well. What you would need to do is get a palm swell put on it, and that's about the only thing that I would say. You know what else you can get with a palm swell and a big heavy barrel? Yielditz Pro Sport. Again, I know I talk about them a bit, but they're a really solid gun. A TGS gun, that's a great idea, didn't even think about that. The final one on the list is a Benelli. Cheap alternatives to Benelli. You know there's no alternative for Benelli.